A woman in a study once described her happiest year as the year she got laid off, lost her apartment, and moved back in with her parents at 34. Not her wedding year, not the year she got promoted. That year. Her answer wasn't complicated. It was the first year she woke up without a plan, so she started paying attention to small things instead. A 10-minute walk before dinner, a full night's sleep for once, her dad laughing at some rerun in the next room. Nothing about her life looked like success from the outside. Somehow, she was doing better than most people with the job, the apartment, and the 5-year plan. It's worth sitting with why that is, because it cuts against almost everything we're taught about what a good life looks like. We're told happiness follows achievement, that it arrives once the right boxes get checked. Her year had none of the usual boxes checked, and yet something about it worked better than the years that did. That's not an argument for chasing failure. It's an argument for noticing what was actually present in that year, stripped of everything she'd normally chase. That's the part of happiness nobody explains properly. It rarely comes from the big wins. It comes from a short list of ordinary habits, and most people never sit down long enough to figure out what's on that list. So today, we're laying it out. 7 habits. Nothing exotic, nothing expensive, nothing that needs a free weekend to start. Not groundbreaking, most of it. But almost nobody actually does it consistently, and that gap is where the whole video lives. Here's the thing about that gap, though. It's not usually a knowledge problem. Most adults could probably list 2 or 3 of these habits themselves if you asked them cold. The problem is that none of these habits feel urgent on any given day. Skipping a walk doesn't cost you anything today. Neither does staying up late or letting a kind moment pass by unused. The cost only shows up later, quietly, stacked over months, by which point it's hard to trace back to any single missed habit. That's exactly why these 7 tend to get ignored in favor of things that feel more pressing. A deadline screams for attention. A missed walk stays silent. But silent costs still get paid eventually, one way or another. There's a second reason these habits get skipped too, and it has nothing to do with how much time anyone has. It's that none of them look impressive. There's no before and after photo for going to bed on time. Nobody posts about the specific gratitude they practiced this morning. In a culture that rewards visible effort, quiet consistency doesn't get much applause, even though it tends to outperform the flashier stuff by a wide margin over time. Keep that in mind as we go through these. None of the 7 habits ahead are going to look dramatic in the moment. That's sort of the point. Fair warning, though. Some of these will sound too simple. You'll hear one and think, I already know that. Maybe you do. Knowing it and actually doing it every day are 2 different things, and that gap is where most people get stuck for years without noticing. Quick housekeeping. If you want more of this, subscribe now, so the algorithm doesn't bury this channel in your feed. Like the video if any of it lands. Comment when a specific point hits close to home. I'll give you a line for each one. And stay through the whole thing. The later habits build on the earlier ones. One more thing before we start, and it's a small one. None of what follows asks you to believe anything on faith. Try each habit for a week before deciding whether it's worth keeping. That's a fair test, and it's the only one that actually matters here. Number 1. Start the day with gratitude. There's an old story about a monk who was asked what he did each morning before anything else. He said he sat for 1 minute and named what he already had. Not what he wanted, not what was missing, just what was already true. That's the whole habit, really. For most people, the first thought of the day is dread, the alarm, the traffic, the 40 unread emails already stacking up. Once that thought sets the tone, the day tends to follow its lead, like it inherited a mood it never chose. Gratitude interrupts that before it can take hold. I've noticed something interesting about how people talk about gratitude, though. It gets treated like forced positivity, like pretending everything's fine when it isn't. That's not it. You can be stressed about a deadline and still notice you woke up with working lungs. Both things exist at once. The distinction matters because plenty of people try gratitude once, feel a little silly or dishonest doing it, and quietly give up. That reaction usually means they're doing the forced positivity version instead of the honest version. The honest version doesn't ask you to feel good about your circumstances. It just asks you to also notice what's true alongside the hard parts, without letting one cancel out the other. Psychologist Robert Emmons, who studied this at UC Davis for decades, keeps landing on the same result. People who name specific things they're grateful for report higher life satisfaction than people who don't, not because their circumstances changed, because their attention did. Think of your mind like a camera. It focuses on one thing at a time. Point it at what's missing, and that fills the frame. Point it at what's working, and the whole picture shifts. There's a reason this matters more than it sounds like it should. Your attention isn't neutral. It doesn't just passively record your day, it actively decides what counts as your day. Two people can sit through the exact same Tuesday, one focused on the printer that jammed and the meeting that ran long, the other focused on the co-worker who covered for them and the walk they managed to fit in at lunch. By evening, those two people will describe entirely different Tuesdays, even though nothing external was different at all. Ask either of them how their week is going, and you'll get two completely different answers, despite living through nearly identical circumstances. That gap isn't dishonesty. It's just where their attention happened to land, morning after morning, until it hardened into a habit of its own. Here's where most people get it wrong, though. They keep it vague. I'm grateful for everything doesn't stick. Specific gratitude does. Try naming 3 things tomorrow before you check your phone. The smell of fresh coffee, the 5-minute call you get to make to your mother later, a bed that was actually warm, small, specific, real. If you want to push it further, try naming 1 thing you're grateful for that you'd normally complain about. Traffic that gives you 15 minutes alone with your thoughts. A slow morning that forces you to actually eat breakfast sitting down instead of standing at the counter. This version is harder, and that's exactly why it works. It trains your attention to find something worth keeping, even in the parts of the day you'd normally write off. There's a version of this that takes it further still. Some people write down 1 sentence each morning describing something they're looking forward to that day. Not something huge, just 1 small anchor point. It gives the brain something to move toward instead of just something to survive. A co-worker who does this told me she picked the habit up during a genuinely rough stretch at work, and the strange part wasn't that the stretch got easier. It didn't. What changed was that she stopped dreading every single morning of it equally. Some mornings had an anchor now. That was enough to make the difference. The monk's version of this shows up almost word for word in Epictetus centuries later. He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. Notice what that isn't saying. It isn't telling you to ignore real problems. It's telling you not to let the absence of one thing blind you to everything else that's already working. There's a ripple effect worth mentioning too. Gratitude tends to move outward. Thank someone specifically, not the automatic thanks we throw around, but something like, I noticed you stayed late to help me, and it mattered. People remember being seen. That memory tends to shape how they treat the next person. This isn't just a nice side effect either. It's arguably the more important half of the habit. A lot of people treat gratitude as a purely internal exercise, something you journal about privately and never mention out loud. But gratitude spoken directly to someone does something a private journal entry can't. It closes a small social loop. The other person walks away having been specifically seen, not just generally thanked. And that specificity is what makes it stick in their memory rather than sliding past as background noise. Give this 1 week, just 7 mornings. That's it. Notice if anything shifts by day 7. You're not looking for a dramatic transformation by day 7, to be clear. You're looking for something smaller and more useful, a slightly softer reaction to the first annoying thing that happens each day. That's usually the first sign this habit is working, long before it shows up as anything bigger. Type this below if today already feels a little fuller. I have enough. Number 2. Move your body every day. Quick question. When was the last time you moved your body just because it felt good, not because you were trying to burn something off or fix something about how you look? If you had to pause on that, you're not alone. Most people's relationship with movement got hijacked somewhere along the way by appearance, by numbers on a scale, by some vague sense of obligation. Somewhere in there, the actual felt experience of moving got lost entirely. Most people treat the mind and the body like 2 separate departments. Mental health over here, physical health over there, different fix for each. That split doesn't actually hold up. Your brain and your body are in constant conversation, and movement is one of the clearest ways to steer that conversation somewhere better. You don't need to become an athlete. That's the biggest myth blocking people from starting at all. It's not about hour-long gym sessions you dread before you even begin. A 10-minute walk after dinner counts. Stretching on your bedroom floor counts. Dancing badly in your kitchen while you wait for pasta water to boil counts. This bears repeating because so much fitness messaging pushes the opposite idea, that anything short of intense counts as barely trying. That framing does real damage. It convinces people that 10 minutes isn't worth starting, so they wait for the mythical day they'll have a full hour free, a day that rarely comes, and the habit never gets off the ground at all. 10 honest minutes done daily will always outperform 60 minutes done twice a month, no matter how the math looks on paper. Endorphins and serotonin get released when you move. This isn't folk wisdom. It's basic physiology, and it's one of the few things that can shift your mood within minutes instead of weeks. There's a second layer to this most people miss. Movement gives you a sense of agency. When life feels chaotic, moving your body is one thing you can still choose. You decide to walk around the block. Nobody else is involved in that decision. That small act of choosing something for yourself, even something tiny, reminds you that you're not entirely at the mercy of your circumstances. This matters more on the days you least feel like moving. Stress tends to build up physically before you even notice it mentally, sitting in your shoulders, your jaw, the base of your neck. Movement gives that tension somewhere to go. Sit with stress long enough without releasing it, and it doesn't just disappear on its own. It tends to calcify into the kind of chronic tightness people eventually mistake for a permanent part of their body, rather than something that arrived and could just as easily leave. There's an odd trap here worth naming. The days you need this most tend to be the days you feel least capable of it. Stress and low motivation usually arrive together, which means the habit has to survive on structure rather than mood. Deciding in advance, on a calm day, that the walk happens regardless of how you feel. That evening removes the decision from the exact moment you're least equipped to make it well. Now here's where people sabotage themselves. They set the bar too high, decide they need to run 5 miles or nothing counts, and guarantee failure before they start. Motivation isn't reliable day to day. A habit small enough that skipping it feels harder than doing it, that's reliable. Start with 10 minutes. A walk after dinner, outside if you can manage it. Sunlight paired with movement regulates mood and sleep more effectively than the same movement done indoors. There's a reason for that specific combination. Natural light exposure, especially earlier in the day, helps set your internal clock, the same internal clock that governs when you feel alert and when you feel sleepy. A treadmill in a windowless gym gets your body moving, but it skips that second signal entirely. 10 minutes outside does both jobs at once for the same 10 minutes of effort. It worked for a friend of mine who hated the gym for years. 10 minutes around her block, every evening, nothing more. 6 months later, she'd added a second walk without ever deciding to. Most people never notice this kind of thing until it's already happened to them. It's a strange feature of habits like this one. They rarely announce themselves. Nobody wakes up one morning and thinks, "Movement fixed my mood." It just quietly stops being something you have to talk yourself into, and by the time you notice that shift, it's already been true for a while. Show me you're moving today. Comment, my body moves me forward. Number 3. Get enough sleep. Sleep scientist Matthew Walker, who spent decades studying this at UC Berkeley, found something specific. During REM sleep, the dream stage, the brain appears to strip the raw emotional charge off a memory while keeping the memory itself intact. Skip enough REM sleep, and that stripping process doesn't fully happen. The memory stays, so does the sting attached to it. That might explain why underslept people don't just feel tired, they feel raw. Everything lands harder than it should. Worth pausing on that word, raw. It's not a metaphor. Walker's research suggests the emotional tagging on a memory is meant to fade with proper REM cycling, while the factual content of the memory stays put. Skip that stage repeatedly, and you end up carrying full-strength emotional weight attached to things that should have softened days ago. A small criticism from a co-worker 3 weeks back can still sting like it happened this morning, simply because it never got processed properly. It's a strange thought when you sit with it. The rough day you had 2 weeks ago might genuinely still be affecting your mood right now, not because you're dwelling on it consciously, but because the sleep debt from that stretch never fully got repaid, and the emotional residue attached to it never got the processing it needed. We live in a culture that treats exhaustion like a badge of honor. Running on 4 hours gets treated as impressive instead of alarming. But no amount of gratitude or movement fully compensates for a brain that's chronically sleep-deprived. Sleep isn't optional maintenance. It's the foundation everything else sits on. There's a particular kind of pride that shows up around sleep deprivation specifically. Nobody brags about skipping meals for a week or ignoring their hygiene. Those would read as warning signs. But "I only slept 4 hours" often gets said with something close to pride, like it proves how much someone has going on. It doesn't prove that. It just means tomorrow is going to be harder than it needed to be, and the people around that person will likely feel the difference before they do. Think about the last time you were seriously underslept. Small annoyances probably felt unbearable. Maybe you snapped at someone over something that, on a rested day, wouldn't have registered at all. That's not a character flaw. That's sleep deprivation doing what it does to every human brain. So what actually helps? Not complicated. Same bedtime, same wake time, weekends included. That's basically it. Everything else is detail. Screens push bedtime later without you noticing, since bright light at night convinces your brain it's still afternoon. Dim the lights an hour before bed if you can manage it. Here's the part nobody expects. Your bedroom itself is part of the problem for a lot of people. Work from bed, scroll from bed, argue with a group chat from bed, and your brain quietly starts treating the room as a place for alertness instead of rest. It's a small fix with an outsized payoff. Answering one late email from bed seems harmless in the moment, but do it often enough, and the room itself starts triggering low-grade alertness the second you walk in, whether or not you're actually doing anything stressful that night. The body learns environments faster than most people give it credit for, and it doesn't distinguish between working and resting nearly as cleanly as we'd like to believe. Rested people are more generous too. They give the benefit of the doubt more easily. Not a small thing when you think about how many arguments start on no sleep. 8 hours isn't realistic for everyone right now. Fine. 30 minutes earlier still counts. Don't wait for the perfect night to start either. There won't be one. Some nights will still be short no matter what you do. Work runs late. A kid wakes up. Sleep gets interrupted for reasons outside your control. The habit isn't about protecting a perfect 8 hours every single night. It's about protecting the average over a month instead of writing off the whole effort the first time one night goes sideways. If you're protecting your rest tonight, let me see it below. Rest is strength. Number 4. Practice kindness. Picture this. You're at the grocery store, tired, running late, and the cashier looks about as worn out as you feel. You could just get through the transaction, or you could say, "Long shift?" and actually wait for the answer. 4 seconds. That's the whole habit. Writer Alan Lux surveyed thousands of volunteers back in the 1980s and found something researchers now call the helper's high, a small physical lift after doing something kind for someone else, close to what shows up after light exercise. Kindness works on the giver too, not just the receiver. Quick caveat. Kind isn't the same as doormat. You can hold a boundary and still be kind, whatever your group chat tries to tell you. There's a version of kindness that gets mistaken for weakness, and it's worth naming directly. Saying no to something calmly and without over-explaining is often the kindest thing you can offer someone, because it spares them the slow resentment that builds when you say yes and mean no. People sense that resentment eventually, even when it's never spoken out loud. It's worth noticing how often the two get confused in daily life. Someone agrees to help move a friend's apartment for the 3rd weekend in a row, exhausted and quietly resentful the entire time, and calls that kindness. Real kindness might have looked like a straightforward, "I can't this weekend, but I'm free next Saturday." The version that costs you your own peace isn't automatically the more generous one. None of this needs money. It needs attention in a world built to pull your attention somewhere else. Someone treated kindly tends to pass it on to the next person. You'll never see that chain reaction play out. Doesn't mean it isn't running. This is easy to dismiss as wishful thinking, the kind of thing that sounds nice in a video but doesn't hold up under scrutiny, except the underlying mechanism is fairly ordinary. People's moods genuinely do shift based on small interactions, and shifted moods genuinely do carry into the next interaction. None of that requires anything mystical. It's just how emotional states tend to transfer between people who spend even a few seconds together. Think about the barista who gets one genuine compliment during an otherwise thankless shift. There's a decent chance that small moment changes how she talks to the next customer, who then carries a slightly better mood into a meeting, who then goes home a little less short with their kid. None of that shows up in any data set. It's just quietly true. You won't get credit for most of the kindness you offer. That's sort of the deal. It works anyway. Tag someone who needs this, then drop, "Kindness returns to me." Number 5. Spend time with loved ones. Myth. More connections make you happier. The busier your social calendar, the fuller your life. That myth has a kind of intuitive pull to it, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. It's easy to measure a full calendar. It's much harder to measure whether any of those interactions actually meant something, so people default to counting what's countable and calling it connection. Reality. The Harvard study of adult development, currently directed by psychiatrist Robert Waldinger, has followed the same group of people for over 80 years, tracking careers, health, income, and relationships. The single strongest predictor of long-term happiness wasn't wealth, It wasn't career achievement. It was the quality of a small number of close relationships, not the number of friends on a list, not how many people show up to a birthday party. Depth, consistency, a handful of real connections. Here's the uncomfortable part. Modern life is built almost perfectly to erode this. We're more digitally connected than any generation in history, and loneliness rates keep climbing anyway. Texting someone isn't the same as sitting across from them. Liking a post isn't the same as noticing their voice change when something's actually bothering them. Part of the problem is that digital connection mimics the feeling of closeness without delivering the substance of it. A group chat can make you feel plugged in all day, while the actual depth of any single relationship in that chat quietly thins out from lack of real attention. It's possible to feel surrounded and still feel unseen, and a lot of people are living exactly that contradiction without being able to name it. The fix isn't deleting every app or going off the grid. It's simpler and less dramatic than that. It's making sure at least a few relationships in your life still get the kind of undivided attention a screen can't fake, even if everything else stays exactly as digital and convenient as it already is. Maybe you've experienced this too. A whole evening spent next to someone, phones out, barely present. That's the myth in action. Proximity isn't connection. Worth sitting with, that one. Real connection needs presence, and presence has become rare. A weekly 15-minute call with a parent instead of a text that says, "miss you." Dinner with a close friend, phones left in a bag on the counter. Asking a follow-up question instead of relating everything back to yourself. Aristotle wrote about this over 2,000 years ago, and it still holds. In poverty and other misfortunes of life, true friends are a sure refuge. He was writing before phones existed, before likes existed, before anyone could mistake a notification for a real conversation. And yet the observation still lands exactly the same way now as it did then, which says something about how little the fundamentals of connection have actually changed, even as the tools around them have changed completely. This often means saying no to other things. Fewer hours online, a little less optimizing your schedule. That trade-off feels uncomfortable in a culture that prizes constant output, but the research keeps pointing the same direction. People rarely reach the end of life wishing they'd worked more. They wish they'd shown up more, for the people already in front of them. None of this requires a grand gesture either. It's rarely one big vacation together or one perfect conversation that makes a relationship feel close. It's the accumulation of small, unremarkable Tuesdays where someone showed up anyway. That's what gets remembered, even if none of those Tuesdays felt significant while they were happening. If your relationships have felt thin lately, this doesn't need a dramatic overhaul to fix. It might just need one honest phone call you've been putting off, or one dinner where the phones actually stay in another room. Comment this for the person you're calling tonight. They deserve my presence. Number 6. Collect moments, not just photos. A man once stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon for exactly 90 seconds, took 4 photos, checked that they looked good, and walked back to the car. He couldn't tell you a year later what the air smelled like up there. He had the photos, though, 4 of them, filed away, barely opened again. There's something almost funny about that if it weren't so common. He travelled hundreds of miles, stood in front of one of the more striking views on the planet, and spent most of those 90 seconds thinking about composition and lighting instead of the view itself. The photos exist as proof he was there. The actual experience of being there barely registered before he'd already moved on to the next thing. Multiply that by every vacation, every dinner out, every milestone people now instinctively reach for a phone to capture, and it starts to explain a strange modern feeling a lot of people report, a sense that time is moving faster than it used to, and that whole years feel thinner in memory than they should. It's not that more is happening, It's that less of what happens is actually being registered while it's happening. We take more pictures today than any generation in history, and somehow remember less. When you experience something through a lens, part of your attention shifts to capturing it instead of living inside it. The camera becomes a barrier between you and the moment it's supposed to preserve. This isn't an argument against photos. It's the difference between photographing something and actually being inside it. Next time something good is happening in front of you, a sunset, a laugh with someone you love, an ordinary evening that feels good for no reason, pause before you reach for your phone. Notice 3 details instead: a sound, a smell, something in your body. Let your senses record it. Try it this week, once. Pick a moment that would normally get photographed, a meal out, a walk somewhere pretty, and leave the phone in your pocket the entire time. Notice how strange that feels at first. Most people report a genuine pull to document it, almost like an itch. That itch fades after a few minutes, and what's left underneath is usually just the experience itself, unfiltered by the need to prove it happened. Psychologist Fred Bryant, who studied this at Loyola University, Chicago, calls it savoring. People who deliberately slow down to register a good moment while it's happening report noticeably higher everyday happiness than people who rush past it. There's a reason savoring works better than just remembering to be present in a vague, general sense. Vague presence doesn't give your attention anywhere specific to land. Naming 3 concrete details, 1 sound, 1 smell, 1 physical sensation, gives your brain an actual task to complete. And that task is what pulls you out of autopilot. It's the difference between telling yourself to be here now and actually noticing that the coffee is still warm in your hands. Most advice about presence stops at the vague version, which is probably why it rarely sticks. Give your attention something specific to do instead of just a general instruction to pay more attention, and it tends to actually follow through. You don't need proof for a moment to count. It happened. You were there. That last part is worth repeating, actually, because so much of modern life quietly implies the opposite, that an experience doesn't fully count unless it's documented, shared, or confirmed by someone else's reaction to it. It counted the moment it happened. Everything after that is just optional. Drop this in the comments. I don't need proof. I need presence. Number 7. End the day with 1 good memory. This is the last one, and it might matter more than all 6 before it combined. It's also the easiest to skip, because by the time you're lying in bed, most of the day's effort feels finished. The temptation is to just let your mind wander wherever it wants after a long day. That default setting, though, tends to wander straight toward whatever went wrong, simply because unresolved things are louder in your head than resolved ones. Before bed, most minds drift toward tomorrow's problems, the unanswered email, the conversation that didn't land right. Brains are wired to scan for threats, and unresolved problems feel urgent even at midnight, even when there's nothing you can do about them right then. Here's the countermove. Before you fall asleep, deliberately recall 1 good moment from the day. 1. It doesn't need to be significant. A good meal. A stranger who smiled at you on the train. Simply that today, nothing went terribly wrong. Your brain gives extra weight to whatever you think about right before sleep, like it's the last file saved before shutting down for the night. If that file is dread, you wake up already behind. If it's something good, however small, you tend to wake up steadier. There's a reason this final thought carries so much weight. Sleep isn't a blank pause between 2 days. It's an active process, and whatever's loaded into short-term memory right before it starts tends to get reinforced rather than erased. Fall asleep replaying an argument, and your brain spends the night rehearsing that argument. Fall asleep on something good, and it rehearses that instead. None of this requires the day to have actually been good either, which is the part people tend to misunderstand. You're not being asked to rate the whole day positively. You're being asked to find one honest data point in it worth keeping, even on a day that was mostly difficult. Difficult days almost always contain at least one such moment. Most people just never bother to look for it before they fall asleep. Studies on pre-sleep cognitive activity point the same direction consistently. People who deliberately shift their final thoughts towards something positive fall asleep faster and report fewer intrusive negative thoughts overnight than people who let the day's stress run unfiltered right up until lights out. Marcus Aurelius kept a nightly practice of reviewing his day, not to punish himself over mistakes, but to close it with intention instead of leaving it unresolved. "Very little is needed to make a happy life," he wrote. He said it as a man who wrote his private reflections down every night so his thoughts wouldn't spiral loosely in the dark. He was, by most accounts, one of the most powerful men alive at the time, with more reason than almost anyone in history to end each day reviewing conquests or political maneuvering. Instead, his private writing kept circling back to small, almost mundane observations about patience, gratitude, and how to close a day well. If someone with that much on his plate found the habit worth keeping, it's probably worth 10 minutes of yours. You don't need to write anything down if that's not your style. But something worth noticing happens after a few weeks of this. You start scanning for good moments during the day itself, not just at night, because you know you'll need one later. If you do want to write it down, a single sentence is enough. Not a journal entry, not a reflection, just a line. Laughed hard at lunch. Finished the thing I'd been putting off. Over a few months, that short list becomes something worth having on a genuinely hard week. Proof that good moments happened even when memory alone might have let them slip. Nothing dramatic required. Just something true, something good. Before you close your eyes tonight, leave this below. Today gave me good. 7 habits. No money required. No permission needed from anyone. No total personality overhaul. Gratitude in the morning. Movement, however small. Real sleep. Kindness that costs 4 seconds. Time with the people who actually matter. Moments lived instead of just photographed. One good memory before your eyes close. None of this fixes everything overnight. Anyone promising instant transformation is selling you something. But stack these over weeks and months, and something genuinely shifts. Not because life gets easier, because you get steadier inside it. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. A steadier person still loses their job sometimes, still has hard weeks, still gets bad news out of nowhere. These habits don't remove any of that. What they do is change how much that hard week costs you afterward, how quickly you recover, how much of your baseline calm survives contact with a genuinely difficult day. So which one are you actually starting today, not someday? Today, pick one, not all 7 at once. Simple as that, really. The 7 of them together sound like a lot when you hear them back to back like this. One at a time, on any given morning, none of them ask for much at all. If this gave you something worth carrying forward, like it, comment the habit you're starting first, and subscribe. This channel exists to help you think clearer and live steadier, one honest habit at a time. I'll see you in the next one.